views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It feels like forever. I haven't seen you and your wonderful faces. Think I'm supposed to hold it? No, that didn't work. Okay, so we're gonna get started now. As usual, we like to do a round of introductions, so we'll introduce ourselves for the audience. We'll go around the table and into the gallery on both ends and our presenters. Hello, good morning today. My name is Marika Scott McFadden. I'm the Deputy Borough President of the Boogie Down Bronx. Happy to be here and serve. To my left.
Tom Lucania, Director of Community Boards.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ken Brown. I'm the District Manager of Community Board Bronx.
Good morning. I'm Carly Wine. I'm the Community Associate at Bronx Community Board 6.
Good morning, Yvonne Capers, District Manager, CB6.
Al D'Angelo, Chair, Community Board 11.
Jeremy Warnicki, District Manager, Community Board 11.
George Torres, Community Board 12. Everybody speak really, really loud. I'm suffering from hearing loss.
Good morning, Shannon Knotts, Deputy Chief of Staff for Councilman Salamanca.
Felix Garcia, Director of Constituent Service for Councilmember Gibson's office.
Joseph McManus, representing Councilmember Torres.
Israel Gonzalez, Councilman Mark Jonai's office.
Starting over here in the gallery.
Hi, good morning. Erica Downey, Department of Health. Good morning, Department of
Oh, over to my left.
Lopez, Bronx Borough Commissioner, DOT.
Thank you so much, everyone. Pursuant to Chapter 4, Section 85, and Chapter 69, Section 2706 of the New York City Charter, a joint meeting of the Bronx Borough Service Cabinet and Bronx Borough Board will take place on Thursday today, March 21st, 2019 at 9:15 at 851 Grand Concourse here in the Grand Rotunda. So our first, as we will be jumping directly into our agenda, our first presenter today is an overview of DLT projects and initiatives. And we are being presented by, again, our friend to the Bronx, Nivardo Lopez, Borough Commissioner, New York City DOT. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy, and again, good morning, everybody. I'm here today, DOT is here today to talk about two initiatives. One is our pedestrian ramp program, and here to talk about that today is Associate Deputy Commissioner Rosa Rijos and Executive Director Nicole Altmix. And then after that, we're going to talk about our update to our Vision Zero report. In front of you should be a copy of our original borough plan that we released in 2015 that talked about the borough, that Vision Zero initiatives that started then. And then we just released a 2019 update to our Vision Zero proposal. So I'm going to give a brief presentation about what our Bronx updates, what's contained in our Bronx updates. So I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, and they're going to walk you through our PedRamp program.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having us. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about the pedestrian ramp program at DOT. DOT currently manages various assets, over 6,000 miles of roadway, over 12,000 miles of sidewalk, and about 320,000 pedestrian ramps. Does everybody know what a pedestrian ramp is?
Yes.
Okay, just in case you don't, a pedestrian ramp is the ramped part of the sidewalk that sometimes has the red detectable warning surface that helps people get safely on and off the sidewalk and into the street. So there's a lot of infrastructure that DOT currently manages, and we're really concerned at DOT to ensure that the majority of our assets are accessible for all users. And so right now we're conquering a program just that deals with pedestrian ramps. So there's a lot of different people that work in our right-of-way, on the sidewalk, on the pedestrian ramps. Our partners at DDC do a lot of capital construction, and we have in-house forces, construction crews that do pedestrian ramp work at DOT. We've also got a bunch of other sister agencies that do work within the right-of-way, like EDC and various other agencies, and private developers and utility companies also work in the corner on ramps. So right now we're building a brand new team specifically dedicated to pedestrian ramps at DOT. We've got engineers, planners, architects, outreach staff, budget team, inspectors, and we're really tasked with ensuring that all of the ramps throughout the city are built or are currently compliant with the Americans with Accessibilities Act. So oh, you can't hear me. They can't hear anything. Do you want me to start over? I can yell.
Well, we don't want you to yell, and we don't yet want you to start over.
Okay.
Let's see if we can touch base with the sound.
Okay.
And
Sure. Hello? Okay. So this program, is that better?
is it better? Yes? No? Okay, okay,
You can
Okay.
maybe.
okay. Gotcha.
How about this? A little better? Okay. So this program that I was just talking about,
Is it possible you can speak from the middle?
sure. I'm gonna go in the middle.
We're just going to get a little creative.
Sure.
It.
Okay. Sure. Good morning. Okay. I'll just keep
Still use the, what's her name?
Okay. Okay.
Use the
Okay,
microphone.
So the program that we're building at DOT is about 400 people.
Excuse me.
Okay, the program that we're building at DOT is about 400 people. We've got planners, engineers, architects, all dedicated to ensuring that the ramps throughout the city, the 320,000 or more ramps, are compliant with the ADA, and they're available for everyone to use, not just people in wheelchairs, not just people with visual impairments. They're for seniors, they're for people with laundry carts, they're for people with strollers, they're for everybody. And so this is the task of the new program. So we have an extensive outreach plan as part of this program. We've been working internally at DOT to make sure all of the divisions understand the critical nature of this program. And we've also been working with outside entities, such as other agencies, to make sure that they understand their part in this program also. If they work in our right-of-way, they're required to do the ramps according to ADA. We've also been working very closely with Bronx Borough Commissioner Nivardo Lopez's office to make sure that we're in the right spots at the community as they help us get there. So we just launched a website specifically dedicated to the pedestrian ramp program. You can find information about the program on this website. You can find information about our progress for a survey that we're currently doing, resources for technical documents that we're going to be uploading. It should just be used as a general resource for the program. So what we're doing right now is a comprehensive survey of all of our pedestrian ramps citywide. So we're using LiDAR technology, which is essentially like a Google car that drives around and captures images. And then we're using a company to place dots on these images to calculate measurements for each ramp citywide. And we're doing this so we can figure out whether or not our ramps throughout the city are compliant with the ADA. So we're measuring all corners, mid-blocks, islands, everything throughout the city. And we are expecting to finish this survey in October of this year. Okay. So what do we do with all that data, right? Because we're measuring hundreds of thousands of ramps. We're figuring out with that data if ramps are not compliant with the ADA, then they need to be installed or upgraded. And so how do we prioritize that work? So we're using this information to direct the work. Either DDC would do it or we would do it with our in-house construction forces. So how do we tackle this work? We follow resurfacing. The program largely follows where roads are resurfaced. So anything that gets resurfaced, if the ramp needs to be upgraded or installed, we will follow. We also will be providing temporary repairs for complaints that we receive, and then also programming those for permanent repairs. We will also be including pedestrian ramps in projects that we do, such as street improvement projects, like you guys are familiar with Lafayette or Bryant and Seneca. Things like that will include pedestrian ramps. And then we're also doing an additional prioritization analysis after those initiatives to tackle the rest of the pedestrian ramps citywide. So what that is the survey is giving us specific measurement information about each ramp. And so we will score that ramp, and we will combine that with a geographic analysis, which essentially looks at demographic information, such as where do people with visual impairments live? Where do people with mobility challenges live? Where do seniors live? And overlaying that with other information, such as where are the specialized facilities and our Vision Zero initiatives, to make sure that we can come up with prioritized areas in order to keep tackling the rest of the ramps citywide. So I guess the big question is, what you want to know is, when is my ramp going to be done? When are the ramps in my board going to be done? So like I said, we primarily follow resurfacing, but there's various ways that you can contact DOT if there's something that you need to talk to us about in terms of ramps. We have 311, obviously. We have an accessibility coordinator that you can contact directly. We will also have a form available on our website that you can fill out for more information and to let us know if something is wrong with a pedestrian ramp in your area. But I want to point out that all of the ramps, if necessary, if they're not compliant, will be addressed citywide through this prioritization that I just described. If you want to know about our resurfacing schedules, those are on our website. The information is here, and I'm happy to circulate these links. And then our next steps basically are to process the survey data that we're currently collecting, and we will get ramped up for all of the construction that we're going to be starting this season. And we're going to continue to coordinate with all of the other agencies citywide and make sure that we are very transparent about the program progress on our website. Does anyone have any questions? Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm surprised. Yes, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Sure.
My question is, when will every pedestrian ramp in the city be ADA compliant? And is there a prioritization of ramps that are in proximity to facilities that potentially can cater to the same, like senior
Sure. So the plan that we're working on is a 27-year plan. Yeah, for all ramps throughout the city. And like I said, we follow resurfacing. So if those locations near schools get resurfaced, that's our number one priority to go to. And then the prioritization analysis that I talked about with the demographic information looks at the schools and the specialized facilities to make sure that we can go and prioritize those locations next.
So there's no specific prioritization for schools or senior centers. It's just a consequence of populations that could be impaired.
Well, I wouldn't call it a consequence. It's a specific addition to the analysis that we're doing that involves 10 variables for the prioritization.
What are the variables?
I'm happy to email those to you, but they're listed on the presentation. They were a high proximity to specialized facilities, high density of senior population, high density of people with ambulatory disabilities, visual disabilities. I can send you a list also if that's easier.
Thank you.
Sure.
One thing that I want to clarify regarding the prioritization is the signs, the location of your.
I can't hear what you're saying.
It's a portion allocated to the condition. So if a ramp gets, really worse shape, because every element will be evaluated and numbered. So it's a combination of the two.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions? And I'm going to ask that everyone try to project as I am right now, because although the audio is working in conjunction with the video, it is difficult for everyone to hear within the room. So if you can just project, including our presenters, it will be helpful. So any other questions regarding DOT, the presentation, or DOT as a whole? Who's that? Oh,
Yes,
yes.
hi. Is there any community input before this goes into effect?
Before the construction goes into effect? Well, we follow resurfacing because the ADA requires us to follow alterations, and resurfacing is an alteration, and so that's what we're doing right now. For the prioritization analysis, we can be talking to the community through Nivardo Lopez's office. If you guys have input, we're happy to.
Well, Mike?
Sure. It's like construction work. So anybody doing work in the corners, street reconstruction projects that we do in-house, like safety improvement projects, all of those are also considered as alterations under the ADA. So it's not only strictly resurfacing and obviously our complaint process, but also any other type of work. And that's, Nicole alluded a couple of times that we're working with sister agencies to make sure that everybody understands the regulations of the ADA. So not only DOT, but anybody doing work that will be considered an alteration builds ramps as well.
My concern is we have been going back and forth with the DOT over road dieting. The community is against it. The community board was against it. The town halls, two that we had, were against it. All our elected officials are against it. Community associations are all against it. Our business community is all against it. We have 1,000 petitions that we presented, all against it, and yet it's being done anyway. Last time I looked, it still was a democracy where the elected officials worked for the people, and yet the people are saying one thing, and our elected officials will take, well, not our local elected officials, but the mayor's office is telling us something altogether different, that you will have it, this is the best thing for you, and this is what you're going to have. I don't understand that.
In regards to the pedestrian ramp, which is what we're here to talk about, we are following the ADA requirements, right? So wherever we do something, we want to make sure that it's accessible for all. So this program is focused on whatever is required to be done. The prioritization is an area that we will explore as we go because there's cycles in the city for resurfacing, right? It takes us the entire city, we say approximately 18 years to do. We know there will be funds that we can use to target those prioritization locations to make sure that we address accessibility as much as we can throughout the entire city.
Right, but the needs of the community should be met.
Sure.
In other words, basically before anything goes into effect, the community should be polled, and the will of the people should be adhered to, I would think.
Sure, absolutely. We hope that accessibility is important for the community as it is for us.
Thank
So
you.
we want to get your input, but we want to make sure that we make it accessible for everyone.
Thank you.
Any other question, Mr. McManus?
Yeah, this has to do maybe with just DOT. Can I ask a question about that? When, okay, fine, thank you.
What happened?
The second presentation that they're making is going to answer this question. So there are two issues.
Any other questions? Okay. Our second.
So is there a way to...
George, stop making a mess, will you?
So that goes forward. All right, hello again, everybody. Can you all hear me? Okay, great, thank you. So I'm here to talk about our 2019 Bronx Pedestrian Safety Action Plan update. As I mentioned earlier before, in 2015, we put out Borough Safety Action Plan that talked about what Vision Zero was going to do, the initiatives that the department was going to take to lower traffic fatalities and traffic crashes. So 4 years later, we're coming back to community boards and stakeholders and elected officials to talk about what's happened in the last 4 years, what new initiatives is DOT going to do, and then of course I want to take questions about the program. So in front of you, you all have a copy of the old plan from 2015 and the new update from 2019. So this presentation is just going to quickly go over the Bronx portion of this new plan, and then I'll be able to take questions. So for 2019, we're announcing a couple of new initiatives. One is that we are going to install LPIs at every priority corridor in the Bronx. And for those of you, LPI is what we call a leading pedestrian interval. It is giving the pedestrian a head start at an intersection. So the pedestrian signal will give the pedestrian a walk sign before the traffic signal turns green. That gives the pedestrian a head start. It gets them in the crosswalk before the cars can start turning, which makes the vehicles go slower because they now see the pedestrian a little bit more clear. We're also modifying signal timing at our priority intersections, modifying signal timing to sort of calm traffic and make sure drivers and motorists are obeying the speed limit. We are also making a change to the speed hump program. We are now going to focus on what our data tells us. So we're going to look specifically at areas where we find speeding, and we're going to prioritize those locations for speed hump installation. We are also going to do more corridor outreach. So before we go out to a community to sort of implement any projects, we're first going to go out to a community and meet with folks on the ground, homeowners, business owners, to sort of learn about the conditions, tell folks what we're doing, and sort of get more community input. We're also going to conduct a study of senior pedestrians that are injuries to seniors who are pedestrians. The senior population in New York City makes a disproportionate number of injuries and fatalities in the city, so we're going to study exactly what's causing this and what other initiatives DOT can do to protect our seniors. Another couple of initiatives we're going to talk about are actually on-street treatments. So this is a photo of Burnside Avenue and Grand Avenue in Community Board 5. Here you could see that we installed a left-turning calming treatment where we install markings to sort of guide vehicles to make a left turn slower. And also we put a hardened center line at the double yellow line to really get cars not to cheat the left. Many cars, when they are at an intersection, like to sort of make a very quick and fast left turn, and that is often what leads to pedestrian collisions and injuries. At intersections with the left turn calming traffic, the average speed declined by 21%. So we are looking to install these more throughout the city, but we're going to prioritize locations that have a high volume of crashes and pedestrian injuries. We've also begun installing roundabouts and traffic circles. So the photo on the bottom here is the roundabout that we installed back in 2016 at Intervale Avenue and Dawson Street in the Bronx. This roundabout will create sort of better traffic processing while at the same time allowing the drivers to see pedestrians a little bit more clear and make it safer for all the users of the roadway. We are also installing raised crosswalks. So think of the raised crosswalk as sort of a speed hump at the crosswalk. This means that there will be a flush path from one side of the sidewalk to the other side. It'll, again, create more pedestrian visibility. It'll slow down traffic, and it also is great for those in wheelchairs or using strollers because they no longer have to worry about dipping down. And the next page. So this is a highlight. So in the report, we have a page like this for the citywide, and we have a page like this for each borough. And this highlights all the initiatives that we've done over the past 4 years as part of Vision Zero. So in the last 4 years, we've installed 68 safety engineering projects in the Bronx. We've installed 360 LPIs, that's at 360 intersections in the Bronx in the last 4 years. We've issued, the NYPD has issued 193,000 speeding tickets to drivers who are not obeying the speed limit. And our automated camera enforcement program has issued 740,000 violations. And I'm going to talk about the speed camera program a little bit later because there have been some recent changes that I want to share with you. We've also looked at our street teams, which are DOT staff that goes out to educate drivers and pedestrians and cyclists. We've gone out to 90 different locations over the past 4 years where we sort of target drivers in either the morning or the PM rush to educate them on Vision Zero and safe driving. We've also, our safety education division has gone out to 487 schools in the Bronx to talk to students and the younger population in the Bronx to talk about traffic safety, pedestrian safety, and cycling safety. And we've also visited 23 senior centers over the past 4 years. And these locations are, we of course get invited, but we also get suggestions from elected officials and community boards. So if you have a location that you have in mind that you'd like us to visit, let me know and we can definitely work with the school or the senior center. So this page just summarizes what I've said before, but I want to call two things to attention. One is that pedestrian fatalities in the Bronx have declined by 31% over the pre-Vision Zero era. So we've made some progress, which is great, but we still have a lot more to do to bring this number down to zero. Also, we've made safety engineering improvements at 91% of all priority corridors in the Bronx. And the priority corridors in the Bronx are the locations that have the highest amount of pedestrian fatalities and the highest amount of severe pedestrian injuries. This is an updated map, our heat map. So we had a version of this in our 2015 report, and now we've updated it for 2019. So the heat map is sort of self-explanatory. The darker areas are the areas with the highest amount of injuries to pedestrians and the highest amount of pedestrian fatalities. And in the report, this covers the years from 2012 to 2016. The black dots are locations where there were pedestrian fatalities in the 5-year period between 2012 and 2016. This is our Vision Zero priority map for 2019. The area shaded in red is our priority areas. The red lines throughout the borough are our priority corridors, and the red dots are our priority intersections. And just to give you an example of the disproportionate danger that happens on our priority corridors, while they only make up 8% of Bronx streets, the streets in the Bronx, they make up 50% of injuries and fatalities to Bronx pedestrians. So our Vision Zero efforts are going to first target these locations because this is where there is the most danger to pedestrians. This is an example, a case study in the report of Westchester Avenue. We did a series of safety calming projects in 2016 and again in 2018 from Boston Road all the way to Carpenter Avenue. This project involved marking updates, new pedestrian crossings. We also installed turn bays, turn bans. We also installed pedestrian refuge islands. We made signal timing changes. We removed some travel lanes, and we also installed bicycle lanes and sharrows. And then our second case study is Westchester Avenue, where at 3 different locations, we made safety improvements at Westchester and Bryant, Longwood between 158 and 161, and then in 2015 at Jackson Avenue and Westchester Avenue. And at these locations, we did new markings, new pedestrian crossings, we did bus boarding islands, and we also did painted curb extensions. And before I take any questions, I want to sort of call attention to news that came out of Albany earlier this week, where New York City's speed camera program was not only extended by the state legislature, but it was also expanded. So under the current program, under state law, New York City was authorized to have speed cameras at 140 locations throughout the city, at 140 school zones. So a camera could only be at a quarter of a mile from the entrance to a school and could only be in operation during school hours. The new law that was just passed by the State Assembly and the State Senate, and we're waiting for signature by the governor, will expand the number of locations, not cameras, the number of locations where we can have cameras from 140 to 750. In addition, the hours of operations will now be a standard 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday to Friday, every day, all 12 months of the year. And finally, the other change to the camera program is it is no longer a quarter mile from the entrance to a school, but is now a quarter mile radius around the school, which allows us more flexibility in targeting priority locations throughout the borough. So we are awaiting the governor's signature, and then we are going to begin the process, which will take probably a couple of years, of expanding the program from 140 locations to 750. So I now turn it over to the floor for your questions.
Mr. McManus. Just speak loudly.
Just one comment about the senior centers. You have people with canes. I don't like that. That's stereotyping. I mean, I'm a senior. That pisses me off to no end. That's one thing. Second thing is, being on the community board and being in a neighborhood like 40-something years, you'll hear about, DOT. If the community board asked DOT to, study an area. It seems like it's always done when there's no traffic. We were talking about St. Catherine's, right? They did the study in July. I mean, there's nobody there. And now, where I live on Waring Avenue, because of the construction of Pelham Parkway, they said they're going to do the survey during the day. That neighborhood is like a ghost town during the day. So, I mean, I said, could you do it at night when the speeding is going up and down Waring Avenue? They said, we don't do that at night. So, I mean, it seems to me that is a possibility of trying to do a traffic study when the traffic is heaviest?
So normally that's what we do. So I'm not sure who told you that we don't do that. So it depends on.
During the day, they said they only do traffic studies.
Again, that doesn't sound correct.
That
I don't know.
right there told me. We don't do anything at night, you said.
I'm sorry, can you stand up and perhaps come to the mic so that we can have a,
Well, let's
we can all hear the
clarify it then,
conversation?
because I wanted it done when the traffic is heaviest. And I said at night. Well, that's when the traffic is heaviest. No, I didn't say. I said I want to do it at night. That's exactly what I said. You said, I remember, maybe I'm incorrect, you said we don't do traffic studies at night.
I'm trying to understand the difference between overnight and at night.
Yeah.
It seems to be the same. Perhaps I'm missing something. I'd like to hear you explain your statement.
I think, huh? The overnight meaning the period, I guess, after midnight. That's what we're talking about. Like not nighttime, but just like in the later evening.
After midnight, everybody's just,
basically when people are asleep and the traffic is at its lowest.
It's
mostly overnight.
This is information.
this is semantics,
I guess
so.
I'm learning. You learn something new every day, right? I assume that these are like mechanical studies or some type of machinery.
Some are.
Using
So we do both. We do both traffic counters on the roadway where we put sort of, it looks like a piece of tape on the roadway, and that's a traffic counter, which sort of like counts automatically. But we also have folks who actually go out and to a location to like observe and count traffic as well.
Okay. And to be clear, was that what were you asking for?
I live on Waring Avenue.
Strip?
So the
Were you asking
contractors
for-
are putting up signs, don't use Pelham Parkway, use Waring Avenue. So between 5 and maybe 10 o'clock at night, they're up and down speeding in Waring and Astor. So the community board asked them to study it. So when I was at the District Service Council, I'm saying, could you study it when traffic is heaviest at night?
At night. Okay.
And I was told they don't do that at night. I was wondering why they don't do it at night when they know, if you go in my neighborhood, you could park anywhere in the whole neighborhood because everybody is gone. I mean, I was there, my block, it was completely empty yesterday afternoon when I got home at noon. Nobody's there, but between 5 and 10, it's like a raceway. So, I mean...
That happens in many neighborhoods, I'm
No,
sure.
but they're doing Pelham Parkway reconstruction.
Absolutely.
The contractors have a sign, use Waring Avenue.
Right. So, what I'm hearing, I think, is that you do studies at night, just not overnight, and it is.
It depends on it depends on the study, right? So if we're doing a study for a traffic signal, those studies are going to happen at peak hours. They're going to happen in the AM peak and the PM peak because for a traffic study, we want to see traffic at its heaviest. It wouldn't make sense to do a traffic study in the middle of the day. It wouldn't make sense to do traffic study in the summer months by a school, when school's out of session. So when we do a signal study for either a traffic signal or a stop control, we are going when traffic is at its heaviest. Speed studies are done often throughout the day because speeding happens not just in the evening, it could happen at any time. So there, I think we should probably work a little bit closely together to identify when it is you want us to go out there, and then we can do that.
I just asked if they do it at night. I didn't say you have to.
I think there was just a bit of miscommunication.
Right,
yeah, all right.
This might also be enforcement.
Well, there's also
Because
enforcement.
if this is
That's what I was.
temporary, then
That
you're-
was brought
you're
up too.
actually
And I go to
speaking about
49
enforcement.
precinct council meetings, and people constantly mentioned that at the council meeting, that they're speeding on Waring and Astor Avenue. So it's not like the
Prior to construction or as a result of the construction?
Since it's been going on. So the construction's been going on for about 4 years, off and on.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, sounds like an offline discussion about enforcement is necessary.
Yep.
Okay. Any other DOT, Mr. Crespo?
I've seen that your map in 2019 highways, improvements are going to be proposed. Is there any way you got that by community board, or we can see what streets you're talking about?
So that's the priority corridor list, but we can send you a list of by community board. It might. I'll get you that information broken down by community board. So just to be clear, that's the priority corridor. That's areas where we're going to want to target, or we have already targeted. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can get you that.
Mr. Melford, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Melford from Councilmember King's office. I wanted to thank and commend the DOT, Commissioner Lopez, Darissa, and Keith for a year of service, especially for increasing safety on Baychester Avenue. We did lose a young man on Baychester right in front of PS 111, and thanks to the new island, the refuge, the new crossing markings, it's noticeably safer. Parents are thanking us, especially Ms. Berganzo, for taking those locations into consideration and actually doing something about it in conjunction with the agency. So on behalf of Councilmember King, we commend you for actually listening to the people and actually doing something about it.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you.
Oh, and we're, just so you know, Keith is reminding me that we're starting phase 2 of that project this year. Wow. We sent out a What's Happening Here flyer to your office yesterday. I could send it to you again if you didn't get it.
Probably got it. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Diaz.
Yes, hi, Nivardo.
Hi, Al.
We've been going back and forth with this for a long time. Nivardo, you came to our community and you had a town hall meeting, and at the town hall meeting, everyone but one person voted against the road dieting. When you came to our community board meeting, everyone except one person abstained, was against it. All our elected officials are against it. Our business owners are all against it. We gave you we sent 1,000 petitions downtown that are against it, and yet it's being done anyway. And you give us statistics, which again, you give me what your outcome, what you want the outcome to be, and I'll set up the statistics to prove that outcome. You're saying it saves lives, and it may. It will destroy small business. Every elected official I know that's running for office talks about how they're going to help the small businesses. This is going to hurt our small businesses, as you heard at the meeting that we had at the town hall meeting at PS 83. My other concern is if the community is against it, why is government telling us what we need to do? If it's saving lives, then why don't they slow the traffic on the thruway to 30 miles an hour instead of 55 and 65 miles an hour? That would save lives also. Government can't dictate what community wants. I don't think so. Elected officials are there to serve us. They're hired help. We hire them to do a job to serve our needs. And when we tell them what our needs are and they ignore us, that's what gets the community upset. That's my comment. I
mean, Al, we've had this conversation.
Nothing's going to change, and that's the thing that bothers me. If the community was the other way, I would say, fine. That's what the community wants. But when the predominance of the community wants something, and government says, "The hell with you, we're going to do what we think is right for you," that's not democracy. The last time I looked. I'm sorry. That's just a comment. And you're a great guy, and we're friends no matter what. But this we disagree with.
So yeah, and I was going to say that this is probably an area we're going to disagree with a little bit. I would just want to sort of respond to 2 points. One, traffic calming on a local street is much different than traffic calming on the thruway. Because on a local street, you don't just have cars going through the streets and the intersections. You have pedestrians, and who are the most vulnerable roadway user. And that's what we're trying to sort of control.
But we gave you alternatives, and you didn't even pay it. We talked about staggering the lights. We talked about a few different things.
Al, I don't want to have a back and forth. I just want to answer the questions and then move on. Thank you. We could talk about this more offline. But with regards to traffic calming, we've seen it work. We've seen it work throughout the borough. We've seen it work throughout the city where there are significant improvements and significant reductions in crashes and significant reductions in fatalities. It's a proven method. We also hope that, in time that the community and the agency can continue working together to find other ways where we have common ground and can find agreement. But, this isn't the first time that the agency has overruled the community board. This is the policy of the administration, the policy of the agency. If we feel that a safety measure that is proven, that will save lives, take effect, we want to implement it and not wait till tragedy forces our hand. This happened at in a different location where a board voted down a project, we held off, then someone was killed, and then we did something, and then everyone says, well, you only did it because someone died. I don't want to wait till a fatality happens to do a project. If we know a method works, if we know it saves lives, if we know it produces results, we want to implement it. And I understand the frustration and the anger that the community feels of the decision we've made. I'm more than happy, as always, to talk to whoever I need to talk to explain our rationale and to listen to their concerns. I would say that with the small businesses in particular, we did a lot of outreach to the businesses. I met personally with the Business Improvement District. I'm happy to meet with them again. We don't believe that will lead to the problems they say will happen.
Just have to agree to disagree.
Agree to disagree. Thanks, Al.
Yes, Mr. Councilman.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I'm looking at this 2019 report, and I see on page 28, the Morris Park corridor, it does show on the legend that it says the corridor has been delisted. What exactly does that mean?
So we have a fixed amount of priority corridors. So some streets have gotten a little bit more dangerous throughout the years. Some streets have stayed the same. Some streets have had a bit of a decline. So the priority corridor list changes in time as some streets get safer and some streets get more dangerous. So it doesn't mean necessarily the street that is not a priority corridor is not dangerous. It means that it's not as dangerous as other locations in the borough.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one actually that's regarding the speed cameras.
Yep.
And I'm curious about the timing of the speed cameras. Maybe you're not able to answer, but it seems like in some cases they are different. They're different than regular timing on something that a driver might be used to in terms of the green to yellow to red. Is it just my imagination, or is that something that?
What do you mean, the timing on a speed camera,
or where there is an existence of a speed camera? Sometimes it feels like there's a quick yellow.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well,
green.
I think that what we're trying to do, and they don't always happen in tandem, but at locations where we know there's a speeding problem, one of the things we do is we do try to time the lights, the traffic signals, to sort of calm traffic a little bit. It's not perfect. A traffic signal, ultimately, when there's a green light, there's nothing that stops you from going as fast as you want to go. So maybe that's what you're thinking of when we sort of, retime the lights a little bit to calm it. But, the speed camera program, technically the way it's written is that a violation happens not at 26, it happens a little bit higher. So you get a ticket not because you're going 1 or 2 or 3 miles over the speed limit, it's when you're going excessively over the speed limit, like maybe 10 or 11 miles over the speed limit. So I know that there is this sort of idea that, we're doing this just for revenue, and I would say that the ideal amount of violations that we'd be giving out in a given year is 0, because we want everyone to drive the speed limit, drive safely, because that ultimately is what's going to save lives. It's driver behavior.
Yes. Yes.
I hope this works. Does this work? No.
Okay, I'll just speak up. So, Vision Zero is about safety. Okay, one thing that we didn't talk about, let me just raise it as a real safety concern, certainly in the community board A. There is a lot of street construction, Con Ed, DEC, water mains, and many of the streets for a long period of time where it's 2 lanes, 2 directions, turns into 1 lane. So you need a flagman at both ends, right, to make it safe for pedestrians and cars to go in a there a lot. My question to you is, I have seen through the region different municipalities and towns have automated red and green lights that will go on and off without a flagman to stop traffic. Does DOT allow those automated red and green lights on the streets of New York City? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about just a traffic signal, or are
Yes,
you talking?
not $165,000 traffic signal, the ones that are on a pole and they run off of solar power, and it's timed at both ends. Every municipality around the city uses them. Does DOT allow them to be used in the city? It would relieve the flagman, it would make it safe.
I'm not familiar with that, but I can talk to our signals division to see if that's something we're doing. But it doesn't sound familiar right now.
Thank you. It would be easier to get machinery out there than flagmen. Thank you.
But I'll get back to you on that, Rosemary. I don't have an answer right now, but I'll look into that. And
Thank you.
Get you an answer. I don't believe so, but I'm not.
I don't believe so
sure.
either, but that's why I asked.
I'm sure the flagman would object to that.
I would love if the flagmen were out there. I'm telling you, they're not out there.
But
That's
if there's,
the
I will.
problem.
But to your point, Rosemary, I will say this: if there is a location where there, and this goes to anyone, if there is a location where street construction is happening and you think that the contractor is not abiding by their permit, call 311, call my office. We will send an inspector out, and we will make sure that they're abiding by their permit.
We do, and by that time, it's the end of the workday and it's over.
But again,
Okay?
that doesn't mean that we can't go out repeatedly to sort of figure things out. And sometimes I know that contractors could be a little bit crafty, and if there's a problem location, we do speak to our inspectors and make sure they get out there to see what's happening. And we do catch people in the act where they're not abiding by their permit. But I think it's really important that we really depend on the public. You guys are our eyes and ears. When you see something that you don't think is right, if you're not certain, just call us in. We'll go, we'll investigate, and we'll let you know. And if, corrective action has to be taken, we'll make sure it's taken.
Yes.
Good morning. How you doing, Commissioner?
Hey, John, how are you?
Just speak up.
Yeah, okay. Let me ask you, Nivardo, you mentioned about the priority corridors. What is the under the new action? All right, is there other than data regarding injuries or fatalities, I suspect that you would get from PD, are there any other criteria that's being used to determine the new priority corridors or areas for 2019?
So it's really about the crash data we get at an intersection. And we get that crash data from the police department. There's a little bit of a lag, which is why the data we have, the most up-to-date data we have is from 2016. We're only now getting the 2017 data. And, as time goes on, we'll share that with the public. But that's, the goal of this program is to really reduce traffic fatalities down to zero. So we're going to look at where there is crashes, where there are injuries, where we get reports of a lot of speeding. Those are what we're going to look at. But the priority corridors are the priority corridors because they account for 50% of all severe injuries and deaths in the Bronx. And they're only 8% of the borough's roadways.
Ms. Hill.
I have a question for you. I don't know if this falls under your purview or not. After you've done all of this work in construction and what have you, who is responsible for repaving streets?
So that's us.
That is you.
So for example, whenever, now many of you have gotten our calendar for repaving for the year, and what we do is once we mill the roadway and then pave it, then our marking contractor will go out and install the markings that were removed as part of repaving. Now for a contractor, it depends on the amount of work they're doing. A contractor is only required to restore what they've removed. They have to restore in kind. So if a contractor, if they're making a street cut, then they have to not only restore the roadway, what they've taken out, but also if there are any markings, they have to restore the markings in the location that they've removed.
Did you have Additional question?
I'm milling that around in my head because I see that there's a lot of construction in the Ward 7 area, and the streets are like roller coasters as you're driving. So I know that the work is probably still in a phase of being completed, but at some point it has to be completed, and then I want to know, as I'm bumping along like this, is that going to get smoothed out to it's like
Yes. So a capital project, and I think there are a couple in your board that involve sewer work. So once that sewer work is completed, as part of the contract, the contractor has to restore the roadway. And not just the roadway, but also the markings on the roadway. But that is something that we can work together with DDC to make sure that we stay on top of their contractor and that they do the restorations and that they're acceptable to us and acceptable to you.
One more quick question. There was a new traffic signal light put up on the Jerome Avenue corridor between Marshalloo and Gun Hill. What particular study said that that was necessary? How do you determine where you're supposed to put this extra light?
So we do it in two ways. One is that we get requests from your board and from elected officials throughout the borough asking, can you study this intersection for either a stop sign, an all-way stop sign, or a traffic signal? But something that the agency has started to do, and it's actually mentioned in the report, is that we are studying crash data and seeing where there are locations where a signal could help. Now, traffic signals are installed because of conflicting traffic coming from two different directions, and we want to regulate the traffic flow and make sure that there aren't conflicts. The type of crashes that we're trying to prevent are really crashes when two cars collide in an intersection, usually out of T. That's called a preventable crash that would not have happened if the traffic was regulated. So at that location, either we got a request from someone or we saw that there was a problem at that intersection, and then we study it using the federal guidelines and the manual for uniform traffic control devices. And there are 9 warrants. A traffic signal only has to meet one of the warrants to qualify. And that is something that we have on our website. It's on the Federal Highway Administration's website. I could definitely share with you the criteria for what the 9 warrants are for traffic control signals.
Yes.
My question is, piggybacking on Mr. D'Angelo, we're going to do a town hall and community board 6 concerning the Bronx Zoo, Southern Boulevard.
Yep.
They wanted to take parking space away from the constituents in CB6, and I'm just wondering, being that he had a town hall and nothing happened, should we have a town hall and get the same results?
So, I mean, whether or not you have a town hall or not, that is something that I leave up to you. If you're going to have it, we will be there. I mean, the projects, that we propose, we definitely want to hear community feedback and see what we can accomplish and what we can sort of change. But, the goal of these projects is street safety. So our priority is to make the streets safer for everybody.
Yeah, well, I understand safety, but the zoo want parking space for the buses. And why should the constituents suffer because they want spaces in the city block for school buses that's bringing children at the zoo? So I feel like as a constituent in that area, why are they taking my parking space to accommodate the zoo when they have spaces inside the zoo? And because the buses don't want to park and pay, then we should suffer.
So the parking is not being removed for the zoo, and that's still something that we're trying to work out. It's not because of the zoo, or else it would have been done a long time ago. The proposal involves some changes to the street grid. We haven't gone to the community board yet because we needed to make some design changes based on a lot of the feedback that we've heard from everybody. But the parking isn't being removed because the zoo wants it. That's not correct.
That's my understanding, and I have a lot of questions on that, but we're going to move on.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
I said thank you. I know that it is being done because of all of the buses at the zoo and the traffic. So my thing is, why not let the buses go in the zoo and we keep our parking spaces? They want to take the parking spaces from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
But that has to do with the design that we're proposing, not because of the Bronx Zoo. I mean, again, we're going to go to your board and present this plan, and we can talk about it. And if you want me to go to a town hall, I'd be more than happy to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And again, you know, all of you know my office. All of you have my phone number. All of you have my email address. If there's an issue, there's a concern, please reach out to me. Please reach out to my colleagues, and we'll work together on making our streets safer and making sure that everything is in a good state of repair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In consideration of the time and that some of our board will have issues being here to the end of the meeting, we want to move the voting item that we have, which is the adoption of the Bronx Borough Board Budget Priorities Report, which everyone should have for fiscal year 2020. You should have this in front of you. If you do not have it in front of you, and the one-pager of amendments, then please raise your hands at this time if you do not have a copy. Okay. So our last meeting, we took testimony about items, excuse me, and in consideration, we have sent, we've heard from all of the chairs, all of the boards regarding priorities, and we've been able to coalesce all of that into this document before you. And this report is a response to the mayor's preliminary financial plan. It was released on February 7th, 2019. And the board had a public hearing on January 24th, as I said, our last, actually that was 2 months ago, where members of the public and representatives of neighborhood organizations and institutions presented testimony. So at this time, we are considering this document. For the purposes of this vote, chairs, community board chairs, as well as council members, representatives will be counted. We'll do a voice, not a voice vote, we'll call individually because we have a mixed audience. We'll call each board to accept your vote at that time. If you're representing a member, please also state your name. And pursuant to Section 241 of the City Charter, I request your consideration for adopting a comprehensive statement on the budget priorities of Bronx Borough Board for fiscal year 2020. It's my official statement. And as required, we will now entertain a motion to vote on this report. So, is there a motion? Is there a second? And now, if I can find the paper again. For Community Board 1, Mr. George Rodriguez, not. Community Board 2. Yes. We're very anxious. Mr. Robert Crespo. Yes. Community Board 3, Ms. Gloria Austin. Community Board 4, Kathleen Saunders. Community Board 5, Dr. Bola. No? Okay. Community Board 6, Ms. Yvonne Capers.
Yes.
Community Board 7, Ms. Jean Hill.
Yes.
Community Board 8, Ms. Rosemary Genty.
Yes.
Community Board 9, Mr. Nicholas Hamiding. No. Community Board 10, Mr. Peter Sullivan. Community Board 11, Mr. Al D'Angelo.
Yes.
Community Board 12, Mr. William Hall. Council members, Council Member District 8, Diana Ayala.
Yes.
Your name?
Gilberto Alvarado, representing Councilmember Diana Ayala.
Thank
Vote
you.
yes.
Thank you. District 11, Councilmember Andrew Cohen. District 12, Councilmember Andy King.
Brian Melford on behalf of Councilmember King, we vote yes.
Thank you. District 13, Councilmember Mark Jonai.
Israel Gonzalez, we vote yes.
District 14, Councilmember Fernando Cabrera. District 15, Councilmember Richie Torres.
Joseph McManus for Councilmember Torres, yes.
District 16, Councilmember Vanessa Gibson. District 17, Councilmember Rafael Salamanca. District 18, Councilmember Ruben Diaz Sr.
It's been passed by everybody. What floor Erica is on? Shawn too?
Okay, that's 13 votes yes, that representative of every representative here. We thank you. The motion has been adopted. All right, that was easy. Thank you all for your assistance, for thoroughly going over the document, for sending in your amendments, and for your service, as always, to the communities and the community districts that you serve. Thank you. So we'll continue with the agenda. We'll pause a couple of minutes and allow for our next presenters to come up and set up. That would be, we will be getting an update for the zoning. Everybody freeze, stop. Let me just say what we're gonna do so everybody can, move at the same time, hopefully. We're gonna bring the presenters up, and if you are leaving, you can leave at the same time, okay? But everybody can stop now. We're gonna have an update on the zoning flood resiliency, and that's gonna be coming from New York City Planning, and we'll introduce everyone when you get up to the mic. If you need to leave, you can leave now. Or before. It's only a suggestion. Can you write that down so I can remember?
I know a spot. I got here so early because I was still
I'm gonna put that on my business card.
I got here at 8:30, and then found a spot right away. And I was like,
Right. Good morning. Everyone hear me okay? Good. Well, thank you for having us here today to talk a little bit about flood resiliency. Again, my name is Shawn Brede. I'm the Deputy Director for our Bronx office at the Department of City Planning. I'm also joined by Christine Camilleri from our Bronx office and Brendan Pilar, who's the Deputy Director of our Waterfront and Open Space Division. I think we're all loud talkers, so that's good. We can stand up here, but if you can't hear us, just let us know. I'm just going to give a little context. I'm going to pass it over to Christine and Brendan. When the existing flood resiliency text that's in place in the zoning resolution now was put into place, it was part of an emergency measure as part of post-Sandy recovery. And so we always knew we'd have to come back and make that text permanent. And so that's what we want to talk a little bit about today. I think the good thing is in the years since that text was put in place, we've really had an opportunity to learn, both through neighborhood studies, some here in the Bronx, through research, and through rebuilding itself. And so we want to share a little bit what we learned, and we want to give a preview of some of those recommendations that will go in to the permanent flood resiliency text. And so I think with that, I can just hand it over to Christine, who's going to talk a little bit more about that, and Brendan, who's going to get into some of those detailed recommendations. We'll try to keep it focused on the Bronx, but these are citywide text amendments that will be coming through. And so there will be other opportunities to provide input. Our next steps are to begin environmental review later this spring, and then our goal is to certify in the fall. So, Christine?
Thank you, Shawn. Can everyone hear me okay? Is that a good volume? Okay, great. Thank you for that introduction. And I think I also, just before I get started, just want to point out, we're also joined by Jean Yu, my colleague from the zoning division. In the case, during Q&A, she may chime in with some explanations as well. But I think, just flipping to the next slide, an important part of the context for all of this work is Hurricane Sandy, of course, as Shawn mentioned, was really the context within which the zoning regulations we have in place that we are working to update were first introduced. And while the Bronx was spared a bit of the impact due to the storm's timing, parts of the South and East Bronx still saw major flooding and sustained damage to property and infrastructure. So we very much felt the city's vulnerability as well as the Bronx's vulnerability to coastal storms. And we are focused as an agency at the Department of City Planning on what we call building scale resiliency. That is, we really have been looking closely at our existing building stock and what are the vulnerabilities of buildings to future storm surge, but we're as well as challenges to construction that's more resilient and can prevent future damage. But our work is part of a broader range of citywide efforts to address resiliency at different scales, including infrastructure, coastal defenses, as well as emergency management planning, and engaging with business owners and residents to prepare on that scale. So we just want to emphasize, we're focused on this one piece. All these components are equally important. And Shawn touched on this a bit in the intro, that we have been doing a lot of work since Hurricane Sandy. So just want to recap that briefly and bring us up to speed as to where we are today. And so in 2015, that's when the existing rules that we have in place were adopted, and they were adopted to really specifically remove zoning obstacles that potentially prevented property owners from rebuilding after Sandy. And so this zoning text essentially superseded any existing rules that, like height restrictions, are a good example of this. If someone, needed to elevate their home, and a height cap in a special district stood in the way of doing that, this text would allow them to move forward without, facing those kinds of issues. And we have also had a lot of opportunities to conduct analysis in-house, and also at the neighborhood scale dive a bit deeper into looking at what kinds of specific challenges specific neighborhoods are facing. And two of those studies were in the Bronx, in Harding Park and Edgewater Park. We've also had a lot of conversations, over 2,500 to date, with residents throughout the city's floodplain, and as well as business owners and elected officials. And I want to point out that all of those conversations are actually captured in an outreach summary document that's available on our website. We published that in August, so I'd encourage you to check that out if you haven't had the opportunity to review it already. And it's really all of this work that's directly informed our understanding of the need for an update to the rules that are in place, as well as this work and these conversations are directly really shaping the recommendations themselves. And I want to just kind of define and touch on flood risk for a moment. Now, this is a flood map that's zoomed in specifically to the Bronx with community districts outlined. You can see, to clarify, the blue and some statistics on the left, just in terms of buildings and lots that are located in the floodplain, both citywide and the Bronx figures are below that. We could see a few things quite clearly. One, the floodplain, is a very diverse geography in terms of, building types and uses. It's also, the floodplain is an area that's anticipated to grow into the future. So that's something we need to plan for, not just flood risk today, but flood risk well into the future. And I just want to point out that the blue area is the 100-year floodplain. That's what FEMA considers the high-risk floodplain, whereas this green area, the 500-year floodplain, is what you could think of as the moderate-risk floodplain. The blue area is where the building code regulations that apply to construction that we'll be talking about a bit later on apply today. So just want to point that out. And, of course, you can see there's a number of community districts. I know we have a lot of districts represented here today that, this is less of a concern for some than others, but still for some, very much, on all of our minds. So, and we, have, I think, a big part of our approach at city planning has been identifying what are our most prevalent building typologies in these floodplains, in the Bronx floodplain as well as in the rest of the city. In the Bronx, we have a lot of residential building stock in the floodplain, particularly in the East Bronx, residential detached buildings, semi-attached and attached, as well as some bungalow homes that are on small lots, and industrial, commercial mixed-use buildings, to a lesser extent, but still some in the South Bronx. And we, each of these building typologies presents their own unique sets of challenges. And to touch on floodplain regulation, because our work to update and expand the zoning rules is part of a larger regulatory framework. So I just want to quickly hope to clarify, what this regulatory context is as well that we are working within. At the federal level, FEMA plays a few important roles. They create the flood insurance rate maps, those boundaries we were just looking at. Those are boundaries determined by FEMA. They also administer the National Flood Insurance Program, and they also set minimum construction standards that have to be accommodated by municipalities. And you can see there's basically an interplay between our local regulations and having to ensure that they reflect the federally set regulations. In New York City, that's done in two ways. The New York City Building Code, which DOB is charged with updating, has a section called Appendix G, and that is the section that's dedicated to flood resilient construction. And those rules apply to newly constructed or substantially improved buildings in the floodplain. Not all buildings, but those specific types. And at the Department of City Planning, we create and update zoning, which zoning affects the size and shape of buildings and the uses allowed in them. So very much a part of this. We have to make sure that our zoning is flexible enough to accommodate the allow people to comply with the building code, which responds to these federally set regulations. And so just as an extension of that point, what does the building code require of a newly constructed or substantially improved building in the floodplain? We have a graphic here that's just an example of a single-family detached home that's that is complying with what is required. I have this blue dotted line here. I hope we can all see this. Is what is called the design flood elevation, or DFE. That is something that is going to be a different height depending really where a building is located, either within the floodplain or if it's outside of the floodplain. And it's a height determined by the Department of Buildings that reflects what FEMA projects to be the height that water could rise to in the event of a storm. And so, that's really going to, the height of that, varies, but there's a few things that must be located above the DFE and below. The mechanical systems in a home in the 100-year floodplain would have to be located above that, as well as living spaces. And then below the design flood elevation, uses are restricted to parking, storage, or access, and the site must be filled to the lowest adjacent grade. I have another example that's a bit more of a difficult, we could say difficult to elevate building, larger multifamily building. We do not have a large concentration of these sorts of buildings in the 100-year floodplain in the Bronx, but this is still an issue citywide that we're, looking very much, looking to address. And so you see, the point of this is the same rules apply in a residential building with one unit, or if that building has 10 or 100 units. Again, the design flood elevation is called out, and the spaces below that design elevation are limited to parking, storage, or access, and the same principles apply. In this example, they've actually, rather than elevating the building, they have wet flood-proofed a portion of the lobby to accommodate these rules, and actually recouped that lost floor area by allocating that on the roof. So this is just an example of how these code requirements could be applied. And one additional note on here is that if this had been a commercial building, they have the option of what's called dry flood proofing the space below the design flood elevation, which means it has to be made watertight, meaning water can't actually enter the structure. And I should mention, wet flood proofing, as the flip side of that, means water has a way of entering and leaving the structure. So these are the two types of ways to accommodate these rules. Okay, and just to highlight two examples of homes in the Bronx that have actually utilized the existing zoning text that is in place to rebuild since Sandy in accordance with the rules I've been talking about. And I think we want to just kind of highlight a few issues that we've heard through our outreach, a lot of broad support for, before talking about the recommendations in greater detail. I think looking at the first point, and just to emphasize, you can re-emphasize, these are reflected in the outreach summary document, and also these are really the issues we're building upon directly informing our goals of the proposal. The first issue here, more flexibility in terms of the height of buildings is something that we're seeking to facilitate. So both in terms of allowing building owners to take into account future flood risk in elevating, as well as allowing opportunities to recoup lost floor area. And this is, in part to take advantage of flood insurance premium rates, as well as, for reasons related to safety. Something called the Cottage Envelope is the second issue identified here. This is particularly relevant considering the small homes on small lots. We have some of these in the Eastern Bronx, and this is a particular zoning envelope that allows for just a more contextual building on these sorts of lots. And it was something made temporarily available as part of the zoning text amendment passed after Sandy. It's something we've heard a lot of support for making permanent citywide. And a third example, just right now, homes that are non-conforming, that exist in manufacturing districts, do not have a way to rebuild if they are, destroyed by a storm or another sort of disaster. So we've been exploring potential pathways for them to be able to do so. And 4 and 5 on the bottom here really both pertain to how do we offer, a broader range of options for, when buildings, are retrofitted, particularly I think along corridors like commercial corridors that need to be where it's important to have an active streetscape, and the importance of design is so great. How do we expand the menu of options available in zoning to facilitate and support that? And number 6 is really allowing for more options for businesses to retrofit. This includes accommodating options like what we call partial mitigations, which Brendan will talk more about. If you can't elevate a building, can you raise the mechanicals in that building at least above, to a safer level of the structure? And so I think I'll pass it off at this point to Brendan, who could talk more about the goals and the recommendations.
Thanks, Christine. Can everybody hear me okay? So building off of over 5 years of outreach and learning from what has been happening and being built in the floodplain after Hurricane Sandy, we've learned about a number of issues, and we hope that our recommendations will address all of those issues in a permanent zoning text that will be applied throughout the city's floodplain. And also build on some lessons learned from that period. We know that some of the rules work really well. We want to keep those in place. But we also learned that some of the rules could use some tweaking because based on the construction we've seen, the outcomes haven't always been so desirable. So based on the issues that we've heard, one of the main goals that we want to move forward with this proposal is to encourage resiliency through the city's current floodplain as well as the future floodplain. As Christine mentioned, the current rules in the Department of Buildings Building Code and in the zoning resolution apply to the 100-year floodplain. So that's the high-risk floodplain, and that reflects the area of the city today that is at the highest risk of flooding. Well, we know that there's an increased likelihood of storms and that those storms are likely to be more severe in the future with sea level rise. So we want to start planning now for those increased frequency flood events and apply provisions to the 500-year floodplain, which was outlined in green on the floodplain map that Christine showed. We also want to ensure that all building types are able, or at least have options for retrofitting or building to the highest resiliency standards. If you picture the floodplain throughout most of the country, in South Carolina and maybe Florida, you see a lot of detached single-family homes that are surrounded by open space on all sides. Those are relatively easy to elevate. And we have a lot of those in New York City as well, but we also have a very diverse building stock here in New York City, and not all of those buildings are easily elevated. We want to explore options for allowing those buildings some level of flexibility for meeting the highest resiliency standards. We also recognize that meeting the highest resiliency standards isn't always required or practical for a given building. So as Christine mentioned, we also want to allow for partial mitigations that really allow for the movement of mechanical equipment that is currently located maybe in a basement, which is probably the first level of a building that will flood in a flood event, up to a higher, safer elevation. So that's what's considered a partial mitigation. It may not be meeting the kind of gold star standards of an elevated building, but it would still allow that building and whoever lives there an easier time in recovering after a storm event. And we also currently have rules on the books that are in place to remove obstacles after disaster has happened. And while we're now 6+ years away from Hurricane Sandy, we realize that there is an increased likelihood of another storm event affecting New York City. We want to have rules in our back pocket that we can use to expedite the recovery process when the next storm happens. Next. So I'm going to quickly go through how each of our zoning recommendations touch on each of these goals. And the first, as I mentioned, has to do with the applicability of the current rules on the books. The rules in the zoning resolution and the building code apply to any building that is located in the 100-year floodplain. And that can create some awkward circumstances where on the same residential block, certain buildings are in the floodplain and certain buildings are outside of the floodplain. We think it makes a lot more sense to apply the rules to lots that are in the floodplain, and both in the current 100-year floodplain as well as in the area where we expect future floodplains to be. That's the 500-year floodplain. So there will be our recommendation is that provisions apply to both floodplains to reflect the need for planning for future storm events. We also have learned that our current rules for where building height is mentioned, as Christine mentioned, zoning dictates the size of buildings, and one of the main barriers to resiliency investments is building height limits. And ordinarily, building height would be measured from the ground level. But what is shown on FEMA's flood maps is a flood elevation where we would expect the levels of storm, the water from a storm, to reach during that flood event. That is currently where the building height is measured from. But there are also some rules currently on the books that allow for variations on where that height is measured from. And as you can see in this image on the left, it provides for some irregularities in terms of building heights throughout the city's floodplain that can apply on the same block. So it results in a very awkward outcome. So we want to kind of standardize the way building height is measured, either from the design flood elevation or a more consistent reference plane. In the 100-year floodplain, it would be at an elevation of 10 feet. And then for the 500-year floodplain, we'd introduce an elevation that starts at 5 feet, so that building height could then be measured from those two levels instead of this more varying current rules on the books. One of the challenges with building envelopes is that on particularly narrow lots or shallow lots, the resulting building can be really tall and very narrow, and that creates kind of awkward living space for the inhabitants of this building. And from just a streetscape and neighborhood character perspective, it results in a building that's much taller than the neighboring buildings. So we're exploring rules that would allow for adjustments in terms of side yard and rear yard regulations that would allow for a slightly wider building, but the trade-off would be a reduced building height. So instead of a building potentially being 44 feet tall, the building height would then be capped at 35 feet. This would be a little more in context with the built character of the neighborhood and also create a more hospitable living space for whoever lives in that building. There are also no existing provisions for residential buildings in a manufacturing or heavy commercial zone. We think it makes sense for rules to apply to these types of buildings. So we want these types of buildings to be able to be retrofitted to meet resiliency standards and establish some rules for when this condition happens throughout the city. We also want to explore some rules related to the design and the uses located within a building. We currently have floor area exemptions for both wet floodproofed and dry floodproof spaces. Some of those rules work well, others do not. This is an example of a dry floodproofed commercial space that is completely, and that space is exempted from floor area calculations. And the result is a very squished floor plate between the sidewalk level and the ceiling of that floor. And that's not a really great environment for an active commercial use. So that's an existing rule that's not working well right now. So we're considering changing the rule to reduce the amount of floor area exempted, but ensure that there's a good floor to ceiling height for that commercial use to maintain a more active streetscape. We've also learned that commercial businesses really depend today on cellar space for storage. Restaurants may depend on that space for kitchen or back of the house kind of operations. And again, just like a residential basement, this is the first level of a building that's likely to flood during a storm event. We want to explore some rules that would allow for the relocation of that cellar space above the floodplain and potentially on the second floor of a building where current rules would prohibit that commercial use or that accessory commercial use from being located there. We also realize that when buildings start to become more elevated in response to flood hazard events or to lower their flood insurance costs, that there's impacts on the streetscape and on the character of a neighborhood. And we have some rules on the books today that work well in certain single-family districts, but some of those rules don't apply to attached buildings or multifamily districts or mixed-use districts in zoning. So we want to apply these design mitigations requirements so that if you are elevating a building, you're not just looking at a blank wall. There are stairs or porches or setbacks on higher floors that allow the new elevated building to respond a little bit more and better with the surrounding streetscape. In some instances, elevating a building like an industrial use that really depends on a large single-story kind of floor plate, that elevation is impractical. We want to explore creating a floor area exemption for mezzanine space within that building. This would allow critical business operations to be elevated above the floodplain and protect that part of a business if a storm event were to happen. We also talked about situations where elevating a building might not be practical. We want to explore flexibility for applying rules or keeping existing rules on the books, as well as adding a few new ones for relocating mechanical space that may currently be in a cellar, either on top of a building, in a yard or open space, or somewhere else on a site and not conflict with other zoning regulations. We also have rules today that allow for raised walls and flood panels to be deployed as permitted obstructions. But one thing that is not currently allowed as an obstruction within a yard is a structured wall or berm, which can, in a campus housing setting like on a NYCHA facility, be used to protect that community. That's not something that's currently allowed today that we want to be allowed in the future. And as I mentioned, we want to have rules, emergency rules, kind of in case of emergency, break glass rules, ready to be deployed after the next disaster event. These are rules that would be triggered by the declaration of a state of emergency by the governor of New York State. And then the city, in turn, can apply these rules to wherever the disaster happened. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a storm event. It could be a human-made disaster or some other kind of natural disaster, where a geography could be quickly created and rules related to documentation and reconstruction could quickly be put in place to speed up that recovery process. This was something that was not done after Hurricane Sandy for 3 years, and it really slowed that recovery process down. We want to make sure we have rules that are ready to go. Just to wrap up the presentation, this is our timeline. We've done a lot of outreach, and we're not stopping with it anytime soon. We want to give borough presidents and borough boards previews of our recommendations before releasing what we're calling a plain language proposal that'll go through all of what we've just done right now in details that we hope your board members will be able to easily understand. All in advance of a formal public review process later this fall, where we'll be coming out to your community boards to give presentations during the city's ULURP process, and hopefully at the end of that get these rules adopted so that they are in place by the time the next storm event comes around. Thank you. Oh, yes. And of course, we have a great website with lots of useful materials available. It's not just all about zoning, it's about what does it mean to be in a flood zone, what is flood insurance, and what does it mean for me. These are great resources. I really encourage you to use them, and we're happy to circulate the web addresses and these materials so you can send them off to your board members as well. And with that, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. It's my understanding that right now the Army Corps of Engineers is in the process of dredging Hudson, the ship channel. How significant is the dredging and silting of the Hudson on the topography, I guess, of the floodplain?
Sure. Well, the Army Corps is very busy because they have a number of arms that do both navigational dredging for active shipping channels, but also building the coastal infrastructure that will help protect the city's edges in a storm event. So they're doing both of those things, and they're in their planning for coastal edge protection. They take into account it's called bathymetry, the topography of the waterways of the city. And that factors into their planning for levees and seawalls and other things that will help protect the city. So they have to factor in both the contours of the land and what's happening at the edge of the city, but also what's happening in the water as well in any of their planning efforts. And in terms of just where that's just one of the many components of planning for climate resiliency that we're involved in. As we showed earlier, there's building level resiliency, but there's also coastal protection that needs to be included in that equation.
Mr. Torres.
You? Yes. I would just ask that you speak, or when I ask the question, respond really loudly. I haven't heard much of what you've said, but I've been able to read everything off the screen. I have two concerns. I know that this is a very thoughtful approach, and this is what the city's response is. I worked in the mayor's office when Sandy hit, and I was sent to Staten Island. And my concern is, one, for existing buildings that are in non-compliance, I don't think that we should go easy on them. I don't think that we should allow them to rebuild in a non-conforming matter. And secondly, you had a slide where you had semi-attached or attached homes, and one of the concerns that kept popping up when I was in Staten Island was you had compliance from one homeowner who was doing something on a party wall, but the middle house was in not compliance and creating a mold situation for everybody else. So again, the lack of enforcement on making sure that these things are adhered to, and actually giving homeowners an out to say, because that's what I find even here in my district in Community Board 12, the buildings department doesn't do enforcement. They will write a violation, but if that homeowner never requires a permit, then that violation can sit there for 30 years, and the home then becomes a problem for us as district managers, because what mostly happens is people disappear. Those properties become zombie properties. And again, since there's no mandate or there's no enforcement from DOB, there really isn't anything to sort of address the situation. And you know, the idea that you're allowing these people to do the bare minimum on compliance, especially in floodplains, I think is problematic. I mean, we were lucky in the Bronx for Hurricane Sandy, but I responded that first night to a fire at City Island at Tony's Pier. Fire department didn't even touch it because the waters were all the way up the block to almost Sammy's restaurant. I don't know what street that is. And the fire department was not going to drive their truck into the water to fight a fire. So they basically let Tony's Pier burn down to the ground. Thankfully, that was a freestanding structure and couldn't jump to something else. But again, the firefighters weren't going to put themselves at risk. Nobody else was going to put themselves at risk. That was a commercial property. God forbid that was a residential property where you had to do rescues. Again, you're putting city servants, by the lack of not getting rid of these properties and letting these non-complying properties to exist. I mean, Tony's has redone itself. They elevated their property and everything. But again, my concern is, are we being thoughtful enough on this floodplain proposal?
Yeah, maybe I can take a stab
Louder.
at one of the questions that you answered, which was, what are we doing more locally to address land use and planning challenges that may not be addressed by the citywide text? Like, we want these rules to be applied throughout the city's floodplain, but we realize the city's floodplain is very different depending on where you are on the city's 520 miles of shoreline. Staten Island is one of those parts of the city that's very different. And that's where our local neighborhood planning efforts are really important. In Staten Island, in the area that was probably most devastated as any part of New York City, we've actually reflected the state's buyout program in that area where there were homes that truly didn't comply with the environment that they lived in. They were in wetlands, in very low-lying areas. And we changed zoning to make to reduce the ability of those properties to be able to rebuild after a storm, because it didn't make sense that they continue being there any longer. Those are rules that are unique to parts of the city that have that extreme vulnerability. And we're starting to do that in other places of the city. But that's not the case everywhere else too. So we both have to make sure that we have citywide rules that are flexible generally for most buildings, but we also have to take a more targeted approach to neighborhoods that may have specific issues that we can't get at with something like this.
Mr. McManus.
I have two questions. One, there's nothing in there that I saw that makes utilities resistant. And Community Board 11, where I live, it wasn't any flooding. It was the trees that fell down during Sandy that knocked out the utility poles. And even if you raise buildings, will you make it mandatory that the utilities come from the top? Because my actual building where I live, the five of us, there's a trench from underneath across the street, and it comes up through, whatever, through piping, the electricity. And the other thing, I was a construction worker for 40 years, so I know how buildings are built. They put the diesel generators on the roof, but they put the diesel fuel down the basement because it's too heavy. How do you retrofit a building to put the mechanicals up on the top? Especially something, think about, is like a pool. Usually pools aren't on top of buildings. And even apartment houses are constructed differently than office buildings. Office buildings don't have cross members, which apartment houses do, so for the sway of the building. So when a building is designed, it's designed without the mechanicals on the top. So how do you retrofit that? I mean, I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just making a comment. It's pretty difficult.
Sure. Thank you for that. Can you hear me okay from over there? Okay. Yeah. I think for the first part of your question regarding utilities, that's an excellent point. There's a limitation, I think, to what zoning can really address resiliency-wise. It really is specific to, very, very site and building specific. And I think that's exactly why we have the initiative.
Just to make a point, after the storm in 1888, all the utilities in New York City, in Manhattan, are underground. So
Of course.
it can be done, but there's nothing in there to even suggest it. That's my point.
Right. So I think that the importance, I think this is where our interagency partners have been really critical. I think through this process, we've heard a lot, of feedback and comments related to zoning, and certainly a lot that, are beyond the scope of zoning. And I think that, the vulnerabilities of the city's, critical infrastructure, like you're mentioning, is something, we as a city are also addressing, not specifically with this proposal, but that's why there's a layered approach, and not this is our efforts to address citywide resiliency aren't limited to this proposal. I think actually the point regarding a given building, maybe it's not feasible to raise the mechanicals to a roof. These are the kinds of conversations we've actually been having. We've talked a lot to communities, but also to practitioners and architects, and a lot with the Department of Buildings to actually understand these kinds of specific challenges. To really, and that's those kinds of challenges are shaping these recommendations and have been considered. So I hope that provides sheds a little bit of light, but I think that's.
Well, I'm just saying, in hospitals, I worked in a hospital for years.
Sure,
All the
yeah.
diesel generators are on the roof. But all the diesel fuel is in the basement. That's what happened to Bellevue.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it's right on the water. I worked on that building in 1973, on the brand new building. It's right on the water, so I mean, you could never put the amount of diesel fuel up on top of that roof. It wouldn't hold it. So I mean, I know it's a good idea. It's a great idea. Don't get me wrong. The ideas are great. But
And I think what
how
we're
are you
saying
going to
is
accomplish
you don't
these
necessarily
ideas?
have to put the fuel tank on top of the roof. We just want the bulkhead rules that are currently in zoning to be flexible enough that if someone could do that and structure a building in a way that the rules would prevent them from doing so. We're not saying that they have to be up there. They could be on a
But what I'm trying to say,
elevated
those
portion
buildings
of the
are not
ground floor.
designed for that.
They could
You know
be
that.
in a separate, smaller building on the campus itself. But those are we just want to create options for where that mechanical equipment could potentially be located and not say it has to be in one place or another.
I didn't say it was a great idea. I'm just saying, I know how buildings are built. To put something up on a building that doesn't have sway bars, the building, you know, it would be like an accident waiting to happen. That's all. I think it's great ideas. Don't get me wrong.
Okay, one more question from Mr. Gonzalez, and then we'll move on.
Hello. Can I? All right. So my inquiry is more based on affordability, because I know that there's been a lot of things on compliance and we need to make these people comply. What about the small homeowners? Is there some type of incentive? Is there some type of financial assistance that's going to help these homeowners retrofit their homes or make these changes? Because if we are enforcing compliance on people that can't afford to make the changes, it's just going to be a vicious cycle.
So that's a great question. What we're doing here is trying to make permanent zoning rules that will get barriers out of the way for people who want to make these and can make these investments, get these set up these rules in a way that allows them to do these types of things. We're not saying that these things are necessarily easy or inexpensive to do, but we're just trying to solve one of the pieces of the puzzle. We know that the kind of financial impact of making an investment like this is a significant one on a homeowner or a business owner. And we want to work with our city agency partners and our elected officials to address this affordability issue so that as these rules change over time and are made permanent, that there is a structure that helps people pay for these types of improvements.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh. Okay. You have not asked a question all day.
Related to what you talked about, I just wanted to know about the
Can you speak into the mic because we can't hear your question?
Can you restate the question for the audience and then answer it?
I think the question was about the recent text for mechanical voids that we came about, which actually didn't have any current buildings in the Bronx that were affected. It's typically, that was about kind of excessive mechanical space in large tower buildings that we're seeing as a condition in Manhattan. The two texts are kind of mutually exclusive. I don't think they're related. I don't think this text has any regulation on that.
And the reason why I brought it up is because along the Harlem River, we are now having towers being built. So the definitely is related to what you're doing.
Actually, it doesn't affect the zoning that's currently in place on the Harlem River. So it's only in R9 and R10 tower districts, which we only see, there's one area in the Bronx, actually, we're standing in it right now, but clearly that's not getting built here. And those are mostly seen in Manhattan and downtown Brooklyn and places like that. So that if it were to apply there, again, these rules would still be mutually exclusive, but it doesn't apply there today.
Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate your presentation from New York City Planning Department. And we give a nice little hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Planning doesn't always get an applause. But we thank you for being with us today. Thank you. Next, we have presentation from our New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, and we have Tangela. Tangela, is that correct? Okay. Tangela Rahman. So.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be very brief. My name is Tangela Rahman. I'm with the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. I just wanted to remind everyone that our agency, our mission is to protect and enhance the daily economic lives of New Yorkers. And, one of the main components to our work is the New York City Free Tax Prep Program. So we're about a month away from the tax filing deadline, April 15th. So the Department of Consumer Affairs, we do the New York City Free Tax Prep Program, which if you make $66,000 or less, you can get your taxes done for free through our online services. We have about 150 free tax prep sites throughout the 5 boroughs, where for most sites, the income limit is $54,000 or less. And we work with, these are IRS certified volunteer income tax preparers that are knowledgeable in preparing most, common tax returns. And some of our sites, they can assist you with prior tax returns, or if you need assistance with filling out an ITIN application. And so the best way is, I have some brochures, so the best way to find out about our free tax prep program is to call us at 311. You go to our website, nyc.gov/tax prep. Or you could text the word taxes to the number 42023. And the reason we want to promote our free tax prep services is because there's many New Yorkers that spend hundreds of dollars getting their taxes done where they may qualify for free tax prep services. Like I said, most of the 150 locations, the income limit is $54,000 or less. And they can also, the volunteer tax preparers, they're knowledgeable about certain tax credits that New Yorkers may qualify for, but they miss out on, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit and the New York City Child Care Tax Credit. So these are tax refunds, tax credits that are available for working low-income families. However, 20% of New Yorkers miss out on the Earned Income Tax Credit because they're just not aware that they could claim it on their tax return. In the Bronx, we have about 45 or more free tax prep sites. We sent out an email to everyone about, in the beginning of the tax season with the locations and the brochures, and you might have seen our tax ad campaign, at bus stops at the MTA. And so in addition to that, we also have free financial counseling services through our Office of Financial Empowerment. We have about 20 financial empowerment centers where New Yorkers can go and make an appointment to speak to a financial counselor. There's no restriction on income or immigration status. And we have about 4 financial empowerment centers in the Bronx. And I can share the brochures with you. And the financial counselors, they can sit down with you and go over your credit score, create a budget, if you're trying to get out of debt or increase your savings, and they can also assist you if you have student loan debt. We've been partnering up with the Bronx Borough President's Office in holding student loan debt clinics in the Bronx. So we held one at the Mott Haven Library in January where we saw about 46 clients, and we're going to hold another one at the end of the month at Lincoln Hospital. And then we're also planning on hosting one at the Bronx Borough President's Office sometime in May. So, I could share information with you. Feel free to reach out to me if you guys are interested in us doing a presentation on our financial empowerment work, or, if you want literature on our New York City Free Tax Prep services. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if there's any questions, but no.
Yeah, any questions? Sure, Mr. Brown.
Hi. Yeah.
Offers for businesses in terms of tax preparation?
Oh, for businesses? So a lot of the tax sites, they can help with, common tax returns if your income is like $54,000 or less, and that includes, individuals and families. With businesses, if you make an appointment, they can refer you to someone, and we also do have free financial counseling services for small businesses as well. So our financial counselors can help businesses separate their personal and their business finances. But some of the tax sites, it's really important that people go on our website because some of the tax sites, they list what they can assist with and the income limits. All right. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. Seeing that the hour, the time, I just want to make sure that we take a moment to open up the floor to any announcements that you have, or any of the members of the audience who would like to speak out for any purpose. Okay. Mr. Brown.
I just want to say, thank you. I just wanted to let everyone know that our board is currently looking to hire a community thank you very much. Assistant. And we're accepting resumes through the 25th. So you can go to the website, and that's where the description is.
Did you stand because you wanted to speak? Okay.
Oh, okay. Sorry. My name is Michael Sharp. I'm with the Department of Finance. And I'm here because we're actually looking to build a bridge in the Bronx. There's a need between older citizens who are having a big challenge with property taxes and meeting rent. And then on the other side, there are fully funded programs that they're entitled to. There's a gap between getting the resources to these individuals and the money that's available. And we think that one of the best ways to close this gap is to work more closely and directly with the community boards in the Bronx and the civic associations that you're so closely tied to. What we're offering to do is to train staff and volunteers on how to get people involved or engage them, provide them with the supplies they need to actually enroll people, and then act as advisors through the entire process as you build a program to help engage your communities with these programs. And so think in terms of informing, engaging, and enrolling. You're already doing resource fairs and expos and information sessions. We want to help turn those into enrollment fairs and enrollment sessions where they come with a need and an interest and leave having applied for the benefit right on the spot, right on that day, and to get the process started. Tax laws and property laws are complicated, but connecting people with benefits is not. It's about who you are, that includes your age, where do you live, are you a renter or a homeowner, what was your income? With those three questions answered, we can engage and connect people with benefits. And it's not just seniors we're reaching out to. How many of us know someone who might be of that age, a neighbor, a friend, a family member? Are you connecting with mom in May or dad in June? This can be a part of that conversation. And let's give them a benefit that they will last them for years to come. So I would like to sort of connect with each community board member that's here. I made little packets for you guys to take with you. Let's put a conversation on the calendar and get something started today to build that bridge, to close the gap for some of our older senior citizens and other members and disabled individuals who can get these benefits. Mike Sharp with the Department of Finance.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Anyone else? Any more of our, yes, Mr. McManus. Speak into the microphone.
Speak into the mic. How's that? I don't know if it's working. Councilman Torres is having a Women's History Month in conjunction or in partnership with Councilmember Ayala, Councilmember Salamanca, Councilmember Gibson at the Botanical Gardens, Saturday, March 30th, 9 o'clock. You must call to RSVP, 842-8100. Thank you.
Okay. The excuse me. The Borough President's Office is celebrating their Women's History Celebration actually tonight. And so I hope that everyone has been invited and plans to attend. It is at 5:30. Doors are opening, and Fordham University, 2691 Southern Boulevard, and it's Keating Hall, Rose Hill campus. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone there. And then something just as important, the Borough President would like to invite you to join a rally on Sunday, March 24th. This rally is on the steps of City Hall to fight Mayor de Blasio's proposal to build a new jail in the South Bronx. So we're asking all those that are interested to be a part of that rally in order to see that that siting changed. During the rally, leaders will call on the mayor to halt the selection of the proposed jail site in Mott Haven, which is scheduled to happen the following day. Instead, they will call on the administration to select a better site for the jail closer to the Bronx Hall of Justice on 161st Street. And that rally, again, is Sunday, March 24th. And it's on the steps of City Hall in Manhattan, not here. We do a lot of things here. And that time is 11 a.m. 11 a.m. So we know how important it is to be civically engaged and to speak out when we have these tremendous opportunities. So today was a lot of information. A lot was shared with us. And we had an awesome time hearing from our presenters, but we are probably very tired and full of information, and I encourage all of you to share that with your respective community board members and communities as a whole. As always, thank you for coming. Thank you for what you do every day, and have a nice day.